I don't think he's out of place, man. I really don't think O'Malley in the striking department is out of place with any of these guys. I really don't.
The featured bout of the evening at UFC 280 is a fight that I don't think anybody expected, especially in the 135-pound division, but a fight that's going to have everybody's eyes on it from start to finish. It's a battle between the number 1 ranked former UFC bantamweight champion and former interim UFC bantamweight champion in Petr No Mercy Yan, going up against the number 12 ranked, yes you heard it, number 12 ranked, fan favorite and social media megastar in the Sugar Show, Sean O'Malley. Sean O'Malley's last fight came over the durable UFC veteran and powerhouse at 135 pounds in Pedro the Young Punisher Munoz at UFC 276 back in July. It was a fight that was definitely a good test for Sean O'Malley, but it was also one that I feel like a lot of people believed that he would be able to get through by keeping his distance, using his long, rangy striking attacks such as jabs, teep kicks, and long straight right hands, or even pairing up that feint rear uppercut to the straight right that he used to knock out Eddie Wineland with, to cruise his way to a decision or potentially get a late finish. A finish was a little bit more questionable just due to the durability of Pedro Munoz and the fact that he hadn't been finished before in his UFC career, but I feel like people thought that the striking technique and the sharpness that O'Malley portrays on the feet when it comes to the striking game would maybe be able to have that materialize for him. However, the fight ended after it was a pretty close bout where Pedro seemed to have a little bit more success than people thought, due to an unfortunate eye poke sustained by Pedro Munoz that declared the bout a no contest. The biggest test of Sean O'Malley's career ends with a little bit of murky waters, even though he did look good in the fight. When you look at Petr No Mercy or Petr No Mercy Yan's last fight, it was obviously the rematch from the UFC 259 debacle against the Funkmaster Aljamain Sterling. Now, Sterling would go into the fight at UFC 273 as the champion, although nobody believed him or claimed him to be the true champion due to the fact that he won that belt via disqualification after Yan landed the knee to a grounded opponent late in the fight. And although Aljamain Sterling did well, and we already talked about that in my Sterling versus Dillashaw breakdown for this same card, he did well, but I feel like Petr No Mercy Yan was really picking it up in the 4th and the 5th and was able to showcase his defensive wrestling a little bit more than he was able to earlier on. But either way, Sterling did what he had to do, got the takedowns, was able to control Petr Yan from the back, even though he wasn't able to lock up a submission. At the end of the bout at UFC 273, the Funkmaster was able to retain his title, even though in my opinion it was basically him winning the title since he won the title on a technicality in the first place. But credit to Sterling, who did what he came there to do and showcased his superior grappling for the majority of the early rounds in the fight. Now, looking at Yan versus O'Malley as a stylistic matchup, I definitely think that there are areas where people maybe aren't giving Sean O'Malley credit. And I could see why. I mean, I think a lot of people look back at that Marlon Chito Vera fight and see the success that he had now, and the fact that O'Malley suffered that injury to the peroneal nerve after those low kicks or calf kicks, which eventually led him to be knocked off of his feet, controlled from inside the guard, from the top position, I guess you could say, with Chito Vera inside the guard of O'Malley, and the ability to land those elbows over the top of the wrist control, and then the ground and pound hammer fist, which eventually led to the TKO. It was a win for Marlon Chito Vera, and the first true test of Sean O'Malley's UFC career, which he wasn't able to pass successfully. Now, you look at O'Malley since then, and he's had a lot of success. He hasn't lost a fight since the loss to Marlon Chito Vera. However, when you look at his levels of opponents, Chris Moutinho can't really be taken too seriously, and he was able to take a lot of the shots of Sean O'Malley. The Pedro Munoz fight ended in a technicality, and the only true somewhat high-level win that O'Malley has had going into this fight against Petr Yan is probably the first-round TKO victory over Howley and Paiva. Now, I predicted O'Malley to win that fight via TKO in the first round due to the fact that I didn't really see the defensive responsibility of Paiva faring him too well against O'Malley, and also the fact that I just thought it was a really solid matchup for O'Malley to showcase his striking against a top 15 opponent. It was basically a gimme fight for O'Malley, and I think that Paiva's a tough matchup. I think that Paiva is a very, very difficult matchup for some guys in the UFC, and he is a veteran, but I think O'Malley's range, distance control, and variety/variance in the striking was basically making Paiva a tailor-made matchup for him to showcase his skills and break into the top 15 without too much of a hassle. However, Yan is the complete polar opposite of that. If you compare competition for Petr Yan to Sean O'Malley, there's really no comparison. I mean, the closest fight that he had to even close to the competition of Jan was the fight against Pedro Munoz that obviously ended in a no contest like we mentioned. But you look at Petr Yan's opponents, you've got the UFC veteran and UFC legend in Uriah Faber. You've got Jose Aldo, which he finished late in the fight. You've got Aljamain Sterling twice, where he dominated the first fight up until the disqualification, and then made it a very close fight in the second fight at UFC 273. And you have Corey Sandhagen at UFC 267, where even though it was close and competitive early on, Jan showcased his skills and showcased his ability to cut off Sandhagen's lateral movement with rainbow-style uppercuts using his movement against him, kicks to the body behind same-side hooks to hide the body attack, and then eventually round kicks and spinning back kicks to the head, mixed with his beautiful, sharp boxing combinations. In terms of being a well-rounded mixed martial artist, I think that Jan is head and shoulders above Sean O'Malley. The only thing that worries me in this fight is the fact that Jan is a notoriously slow starter with a style that seems tailor-made to fight into the championship rounds. If Jan starts slow and O'Malley's able to bank the first round and a half, 2 rounds, then going into the third, we could be looking at a situation where even though Jan could dominate in the third because he does pick it up as the fight goes on, he might be too little too late, and O'Malley could potentially steal a 29-28 split decision. The high guard style of Petr Yan has caused him some issues against guys who can mix up their striking, but also are very long and rangy strikers with a long reach. Perfect example is Corey Sandhagen. Although Jan clearly did win the fight, he had some issues with Jan getting his hands controlled, Sandhagen being able to hand trap and fire off combinations, work shots to the body, and the only way that Jan was able to pick it up and clearly win the fight was by making reads and winning in the third, fourth, and the fifth. But if it was judged on a 3-round fight, although I still think Jan would have edged it, it would have been a very, very close and probably a split decision on the scorecards. This is one thing that people need to realize. This is not a 5-rounder. If this was a 5-rounder, I would 100% be siding with the side of the former champion in Jan. But the fact that it's a 15-minute fight and Jan is notorious for starting slow, it could lead to some very, very interesting scorecards at the end of the 15-minute time limit. I still am going to side with Petr Yan because I believe he has much sharper striking. I think his ability to cut off Sean O'Malley is going to be showcased tenfold. I think his ability to use inside and outside low kicks and pair that up with his sharp and crisp boxing combinations, especially the lead uppercut to the cross, the 1-2 lead uppercut cross, the cross hooks, the hooks into the uppercuts, and so on and so forth. I mean, Jan is just a master of his craft, and he's a former master of sport in boxing over in Russia. One other thing I'd like to touch on is the fact that I think people are sleeping on Jan's ability to grapple. You saw him be able to scramble in the fight with Corey Sandhagen, be able to wind up on top and not settle for positions. Now, he did it against Aljamain Sterling, but I don't think O'Malley is near the level of grappler that Sterling is, based on the fact entirely that Sterling is the best grappler in the division. I think we're going to see Jan use some inside and outside trips, maybe close the distance with the high guard, throw some uppercuts and hooks, and use some outside trips like he used against Aljamain Sterling and like he's used in other fights before. I expect a lot of clinch work from Petr Yan, trapping O'Malley up against the cage, and then from range, using those body kicks behind same side hooks and inside and outside low kicks to mix it up with the timing, and then fire the boxing combinations off the kicks and the kicks off the punches and vice versa. If I'm going with a prediction, I'm fully going to side with Petr Yan. I'm fully going to side with the former champion based on his competition level, based on his experience, and based on the fact that he's just the more well-rounded fighter. But don't sleep on Sugar Sean O'Malley. I may not be the biggest fan, but I can see how his length, range, distance control, and his ability to mix up strikes at range can cause Petr Yan to potentially get behind in this fight. But I expect Yan to finish strong and either get a finish or win on the scorecards. But it could be close and it could be murky waters for the first couple rounds in Abu Dhabi. But this is definitely the most interesting fight, and although it might have the most hate and question marks behind it, questions are always good in MMA because we're going to get our answers. And no answers, no concrete answers, and no concrete assumptions going into this fight make for a very interesting stylistic matchup, and one that fans are going to be eagerly anticipating and probably the most invested in when it comes to UFC 280.